Hello everyone, this is Kingrats here. Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today I officially present to you my 2025 Stanley Cup Playoffs prediction video, with the final playoff spot now having been determined and being claimed by the Montreal Canadiens with their win last night. We have now officially all of the first round matchups for the East and Western Conference of this year's postseason. And so with that, I'm going to try and predict every matchup from the first round all the way to the Stanley Cup Final and present to you guys what I think is going to happen during this postseason. If you like this type of content, please like and subscribe to the channel for more. I would really appreciate all your support, and let's get into it. So starting off, as you can see here, this is the official Stanley Cup playoff bracket that I'm going to be putting into the system here. So starting off, we've got all of our first round matchups. I'm going to go from east to west just to quickly go through each of them. We've got the Winnipeg Jets versus the St. Louis Blues, the Dallas Stars versus the Colorado Avalanche, the Vegas Golden Knights versus the Minnesota Wild, and the LA Kings versus the Edmonton Oilers. And then in the East, we have the Carolina Hurricanes versus the New Jersey Devils, the Montreal Canadiens facing the Washington Capitals, the Florida Panthers and the Tampa Bay Lightning, and the Ottawa Senators facing the Toronto Maple Leafs. Okay, so starting off, I'm going to go from the Western Conference first, and then I'll go to the East. So first matchup, Winnipeg versus St. Louis. As you can see in the little analysis here, both of these teams have been coming in at very different perspectives. If you've already seen my previous video on must-watch playoff matchups, I did talk about this series a little bit. You've got the President's Trophy winners in the Winnipeg Jets facing off against the St. Louis Blues, who are one of the hottest teams towards the end of the season with their ginormous winning streak and clinching that last wildcard spot in the West. This is a series that I think could really go kind of either way. I mean, I'm not sure if it would end short or if it would end long, but I do think that we're going to get a hell of a series out of this. You've got two very good offenses. You've got a defensive structure that is very unique to both teams. I mean, you've got Vezina caliber goaltending in Connor Hellebuyck for Winnipeg, and you've got very solid goaltending that is super clutch for St. Louis in Jordan Binnington. You've got two teams that are also pretty solid in special teams. I mean, St. Louis isn't great on the power play, but they've had a decent penalty kill, while the Jets have been definitely in like the top 10, top 5 range for both categories, but they kind of cooled down after that early run of just being insanely hot to start the season. I really do think that this series is probably going to go at least 5 or 6 games. This also could be a series where you might see an upset here. It really depends as to like if we're going to get an overtime game or two. Maybe one bad bounce goes one team's way or the other. But I'm going to go and I'm going to say Winnipeg wins this series. I'll say however many number of games once I get through all the first round matchups. Dallas versus Colorado, I've already mentioned this also in a previous video, so please go and watch that. These two teams have got very tight matchups here, a lot of star talent and power. You've got very good power plays and solid defensive teams. Of course, Dallas has been the superior defensive team as of late. They have dealt with some injury issues though. For Colorado, they have done a really good job of trying to retool around the roster and making a lot of trades and adjustments to improve their goaltending, improve their defense. You have an Art Ross caliber season from Nathan MacKinnon. Mikko Rantanen, who started the year in Colorado, is now with Dallas, and he's been pretty good since he went over to the Stars at the trade deadline from Carolina. And they've also gotten great contributions from guys like Jason Robertson, Wyatt Johnston, Rupe Hintz, etc. And they are starting to get a little bit healthier as we approach the postseason. For Colorado, I believe they're also maybe getting back Gabriel Landeskog, which would be a nice feel-good story, considering that he hasn't played in like a professional game in like 3 years or something since they won the Stanley Cup in 2022. So that would be nice. I really do think that this series probably goes all the way at 7 games, but I think, you know what, if we had to look at these two teams head-to-head, I'm going to give the edge to Dallas. I just think that they have the more superior defense and probably the more trusted goaltending and playoff experience as of late, that I think that they're probably going to beat Colorado. We now have the Vegas Golden Knights and the Minnesota Wild. Vegas has been really kind of under the radar, surprisingly, this year. I mean, they've mostly led the Pacific Division. They are the division winners this year, and they've had very good contributions. Jack Eichel with 93 points is their leading scorer. I think he has now the franchise record for points in a season, which surprisingly wasn't that much. But this time, Vegas didn't have to rely on long-term injury reserves in order for them to actually maintain a very healthy and solid roster. They've gotten really good work out of like Mark Stone and Tomas Hertl, who have still dealt with a bit of injuries, but not as much as like what Mark Stone was dealing with in the past few seasons. Their goaltending is probably a little bit more suspect. Aiden Hill, very clutch for them a couple years ago when they won their championship in 2023, but he's been kind of up and down. And since they moved on from Logan Thompson, I think their backup right now is Ilya Samsonov. So we'll see how things go there. For Minnesota, you've got a team that has been kind of in the middle of the road. The offense wasn't entirely clicking, but they had a really good run when the team was healthy. But then when they got injuries to some of their main players, such as Eric Sinek and Kirill Kaprizov, and etc., the team really kind of fell apart a little bit, and that's what caused them to fall into a wild card spot. But you're still looking at a decent team on many categories, probably still middle of the road, and maybe they get some games out of Philip Gustafson where he can maybe steal one. But honestly, I just think that the Golden Knights are just a superior team right now, and unfortunately I think Minnesota probably just got an unlucky matchup, and I'm going to give this one to Vegas. All right, last but not least in the West, we've got the LA Kings and the Edmonton Oilers for what feels like the 1 millionth time. Can we like get a different matchup for these two guys, like in the first round? Like seriously? Oilers and Kings, both these teams have had quite significant differences from last year to this year. For the Kings, they finally got superior goaltending when they got Darcy Kemper, who has revitalized his career from the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade. They've also done decent work with David Riddick as the backup. They've gotten really good contributions from both their young guys and from their veterans. Kopitar, Kempe, who's their leading scorer this year, Kevin Fiala, they've been all very good. They've gotten great contributions from Brant Clark, who has had to shoulder a lot more work on the back end because of Drew Doughty's early injury this season. They've been a very solid defensive team under their new head coach, and I think Jim Hiller, correct me if I'm wrong, and they've also maintained a very superior offense. They've also gotten breakout years from Quentin Byfield, for example, who have really stepped up this season. For the Oilers, they've still been pretty good this year. They've maintained a pretty good offense, but their defensive structure has really fallen apart, unfortunately. They're averaging about 3 goals against per game, as you can see on the graphic here, and it's been really tough. Draisaitl still had a fantastic season, but he and McDavid were both dealing with injuries, and the team's supporting cast is just not really good enough to help them out, and it's been a problem throughout most of the regular season in seeing these guys pick up points. Guys like Adam Henrique and Vasily Podkolzin and Corey Perry, who's still playing at a solid level for a guy his age. They're not getting a lot of contributions out of them. At the same time, goaltending is, I think, now in favor of the Kings, because the Oilers have had a problem with Stuart Skinner, where he has dealt with a bit of his own injuries this season and from underperformance, and that's kind of a bit of a problem. And they have Calvin Pickard, who I think is their backup, but I'm not really sure if they want to trust him with any playoff games. I really do think that this very well could be the year where the Kings actually break through and maybe take advantage of an Oilers team that has been weakened by injuries and from underperformance outside of their top guys. But if McDavid and Draisaitl are fully healthy, and if the team starts clicking on the power play and maybe a bounce here and there, the Oilers could very well win this series. But I just don't really know. You know what? I think I'll stick with the Oilers. I want to go with the Kings, but I think if McDavid and Draisaitl are somehow going to pull things out of a hat. So as I mentioned, I think Winnipeg, St. Louis, I'm going to say this goes 6 games. Dallas, Colorado, I'm going to say that goes 7 games. Vegas, Minnesota, give me 6 games there. And Oilers, Kings, yeah, give me 6 games as well. I think I'll stick with that. So now moving on to the Eastern Conference, I'm going to go from top down. So we've got the Battle of Ontario, the Toronto Maple Leafs, and the Ottawa Senators. Man, I'm actually really excited for this matchup. I'm not going to lie. I've also talked about this series in a previous video, so go check that out. Once again, honestly, this is a series that I really do think that it could have some upset potential. You've got a Sens team that finally makes the playoffs. They've got a lot of hunger for some sort of success and to prove themselves. You got a Leafs team that has shown to be a completely different team compared to previous years. They've got a much better defensive system. They've maintained their offense. They've gotten very good goaltending out of both of their goaltenders. And they've also had with the new coach, they've had just a different identity to them. and it's really interesting to see how they played into it, and they got them a division title. So I guess there's that when it comes to regular season success. But still, this is still the same team that's had the Corp guys who have underperformed in the playoffs and have been notorious for letting the team down when it matters most. And, this is one of those matchups where I think a lot of people are maybe thinking that an upset very well could happen, considering Toronto's struggles in the playoffs. And it's like, there's a lot of uncertainty as to what their future is looking like. For Ottawa, they're really playing with house money because I'm assuming that people were expecting them to make the playoffs, and they probably should have done it last year. But this year they finally got it, and I think that they know that the pressure is probably going to be on Toronto for this entire series, and that they can very well use to their advantage. Honestly, I don't want to go on with recency bias, but I feel like I kind of have to because I don't really have much faith in Toronto this postseason. I really kind of thought whoever they get, it's poison for them and it's going to be a disaster. So I'm just going to play the underdog, and I'm going to say Ottawa upsets the Leafs in the first round. Next up, we got the Battle of Florida, Tampa Bay and Florida. This is another series that I think actually could be very exciting. I really thought that the Panthers were going to really hang in there for the division race, but they fell apart a bit with injuries. I think their defensive structure is still very good. It's just that the injury problems have really plagued them, but I'm expecting them to be fully healthy going into the playoffs. For the Lightning, you've got a team that has done a great job of retooling around Kucherov and Hedman, who's now team captain, with Vasilevsky still in net. They've got a fantastic season out of Nikita Kucherov once again, and Jake Gensel has transitioned perfectly to his role with the Bolts. And this is still a team that I think maybe is getting slept on a little bit. Like, Tampa's got a very good offensive system. If Vasilevsky is at his peak form, then he's like one of the best goalies in the NHL. And they've already played the Panthers a number of times over the last few postseasons, and they probably want revenge for what happened last year. So, really, I think that for the Lightning, this is, bulletin board material with how the season has gone. For Florida, we'll see if the Stanley Cup hangover carries into the postseason. But for them, they kind of have to prove that this is not the end of the line. They've already played a lot of hockey, so it might be a bit of a challenge for them going into this series. But if things start getting tough and we start seeing more of like a grinding style of defensive style hockey, then it might favor the Panthers a little bit more. But I'm gonna say that Tampa is gonna get the superior goaltending. They're going to get having the superior offense, and I'm going to say they get a little bit more lucky on like any special teams, and I'm going to say Tampa wins this series. We've got the matchup that most people probably never thought would ever happen if you asked them at the beginning of the season. But you got the Washington Capitals versus the Montreal Canadiens. This is really a fantastic matchup, actually, because of the fact that Washington had almost no expectations for most people to even get close to the playoffs, and they've had just a tremendous season up to this point. They've got one of the best offenses in the game, 3.6 goals a game. Defense has been fantastic, and they've gotten really good goaltending out of Logan Thompson and Charlie Lindgren. Their power play's been great, penalty kill's been fantastic. They've gotten great balanced roster from top down, basically, both on the forwards and their defense. And Spencer Carberry has done a fantastic job over there. You got a lot of potential players that can really damage your hopes right now for the postseason. But for Montreal, they're just riding this wave of energy that's really interesting. They just clinched the playoff spot. A lot of people thought that this was probably another year of the rebuild, but they have definitely surpassed expectations by making it to that last playoff spot. It is kind of tough, though, to go with Montreal for this series because they're still not that great of a defensive team. They're still a very young roster, and technically they're getting in here earlier than expected. Obviously, the defense, you've got Mike Matheson, Lane Hudson, who is a potential Calder Trophy candidate this season. That's basically running their offense. You still got great offensive talents like Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield, who are going to be running the team's offense, and some veteran talent like Josh Anderson and Brendan Gallagher, of course. It's going to be tough to kind of predict it. I want to stick with the obvious favorite here in Washington, but I don't think Montreal is going to be going away quietly. But I will say the Caps probably win this series, but I think it's going to be a tougher fight than what most people may anticipate. All right, and then last but not least, in the first round, we've got Carolina versus New Jersey. I remember when this series first came out and it was official that a lot of people thought this might be the sleepiest series of all, just because we know that these two teams are very good defensively and that they're probably just going to be playing that way the whole time. Uh, for New Jersey, they're trying to prove themselves once again after they missed the postseason last year, and for Carolina, they've got to get back into it. And unfortunately, they haven't had the probably the greatest season outside of it being on paper just because of what happened at the trade deadline and they couldn't get enough reinforcements. But, this series is one where I do think it's probably going to come down to the goaltending. For Carolina, I think it's been kind of up and down because Frederik Andersen is up there in age and he's been solid, but at the same time he's also dealt with his own injuries. And at the same time you have Pyotr Kochetkov, who is, I think, good on a good day. He can be very solid, but there's also some times where he can struggle, and I'm not really sure how things are going to go there. At the same time, Carolina's power play has not looked very good, as you can see by the graphic here. New Jersey clearly beats them in that category, but they have a very good defensive structure on both sides of the penalty kill. So I really do think it's probably going to come down to goaltending. Most likely the matchup is going to be Frederik Andersen and Jacob Markstrom, but I really do think that probably Markstrom steals a game or two for the Devils, and I'm going to say that actually that's how it's going to go. So unfortunately for Carolina, I do think New Jersey is just going to beat them right there. All right, so when it comes to the number of games for the Ottawa-Toronto series, it's got to be 7, right? I mean, it can't be anything else. Tampa and Florida, give me 7 games as well. That's going to be a tough one to go through. And then Washington, Montreal, give me 6 games. I do think the Habs will keep that series lengthened a little bit. And then for New Jersey, Carolina, give me 6 games as well. All right. Now, assuming that everything goes as I expected, then this second round series will now look like Winnipeg versus Dallas, Vegas versus Edmonton, Ottawa versus Tampa Bay, and Washington versus New Jersey. So, starting off in the second round, Winnipeg versus Dallas. This would be a really tight defensive matchup. Even though you've got great offenses, I really do think that this one certainly is going to come down to who's going to be more clutch in the power play and whose goaltending is going to hold up the most. Because Jake Ottinger at his peak is really tough to beat. And obviously Hellebuck, if he is going at this point in time, then it's going to be tough to beat him too. If the power plays go kind of one-sided here, then I would probably say that Dallas probably has the upper hand just because they have more talent available compared to Winnipeg, in my opinion. I think I would also go on recency bias, and considering Dallas has already had a lot of playoff success recently, I would probably pick them over Winnipeg just because. So, sorry Jets fans, but that's just my opinion. All right, Edmonton, Vegas. We've seen this matchup before, have we? So, assuming that both of these series kind of end around the same time for the first round, then you're probably looking at a Knights team that is going to be probably more superior to the Oilers on paper, just because they have much more solid depth that could be more contributing to the scoring efforts of the Golden Knights compared to the Oilers' depth in helping out McDavid and Draisaitl. At the same time, the Golden Knights would certainly have the superior goaltending, unless if Skinner somehow catches fire in the Kings series, kind of like what he had last year. Then it's going to be a challenge for the Oilers to survive that first round series. And if they do make it to the second round, then certainly Vegas would probably pick them off a lot faster. Unfortunately, I think I'm just going to go with the Golden Knights here because I don't think that Edmonton, they don't give me that vibe that they can go on a run like they had last season. So I'm going to go with the Golden Knights. All right, now in the Eastern Conference, we got Ottawa versus Tampa Bay. This would be ginormous if Ottawa makes it to the second round as well. And if Tampa takes down Florida, that would also be really big, as we know we're going to get a new champion. Honestly, though, I do think that for the Sens, their run probably ends here because I just don't see them having the ability to solve Tampa Bay's offensive system and actually solve Vasilevsky if he is going. Like, if the Florida series is really tight, then I would only anticipate that Vasilevsky gets even stronger going into the second round. So unfortunately for the Sens, I really do think that this is probably the end of the line for them. So give me Tampa in that series. And then Washington, New Jersey, you've got very good defensive systems At the same time, Washington beats New Jersey's offense quite handily based on how the season went. And I mean, goaltending could be a factor here. If both goalies are healthy and Markstrom and Thompson for each side, then you could maybe see like this matchup is going to be very like tight, probably going towards a game 7 most likely. I think though, you know what? I think I'll go with the underdog here. And I'm going to say the Devils probably somehow win this. I don't know how. This is giving me that kind of vibe. So that's what I'm going to go with over here. All right, now in the conference finals in the West, Dallas versus Vegas. If we had to pair these two teams on paper directly, I immediately think that Dallas is the better team. They've got, I think, a more structurally better defensive system. They pretty much match up with Vegas's offense pretty handily. Maybe they get a slight edge just because they have more depth talent-wise compared to the Golden Knights. And also they've got a more effective special teams. If Dallas's power play is cooking with gas and if the penalty kill remains very strong up to this point, then the Stars most likely are going to be the biggest threat to come out of the West. And at the same time, I do think if Jake Ottinger is at his peak, then he probably beats Adin Hill at his peak for Vegas. So I'm going to go with the Stars to be the Western Conference champion for this season. And then out of the Eastern Conference, Tampa versus New Jersey. Honestly, this is really tough to... this seems like a matchup that kind of seems almost unrealistic. If Tampa was to make it this far, then most likely they would have gotten some very good depth scoring from guys like Gage Gonzalez and Mitchell Chaffee, Oliver Bjorkstrand as well, those kind of guys I'm thinking of. For New Jersey, you're looking at probably guys like Stefan Nason and Dawson Mercer who stick up for them in the bottom 6. Maybe they get some solid scoring from their defensive guys, especially the young players like Luke Hughes. Maybe Simon Nemec tags in for a bit. Dougie Hamilton most likely is going to be healthy. Markstrom versus Vasilevsky is a matchup that I still would say that Vasilevsky is superior to Markstrom, even if he's not fully on this game at this point or is kind of suffering a little bit from too much workload. But I just think that the Lightning clearly have the superior offense over New Jersey, and if these two teams were to make it this far, I do think that Tampa probably would survive and make it. So I'm going to say Tampa is your conference champion of the Eastern Conference. And as a result, Stanley Cup Final, Dallas versus Tampa. It's a tough series, man. It really is tough to predict if it gets this far. But if it does get here, I'm going to say it's the Dallas Stars who would win the Stanley Cup Final. So that's what I got. I'm going to say that the Dallas Stars are going to win the Stanley Cup this year. This is my official playoff bracket. I hope you guys all enjoyed, and I'll see you all in my next video.